Ready when you are, Mike.
Okay. Is John going to speak at the beginning or when Rogan arrives?
Just before you, Jean. And we're live now.
Not now. Okay.
No, and we're live now.
Fine. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. And thank you very much for joining our workshop on teaching Israel and Palestine in secondary schools. A couple of slight changes to the program. Professor Rogan has been caught up in airport turmoil, but he's going to join us from Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam at about 11:10. He's very keen to say a few words, very keen to motivate us, very interested in the teaching of this subject in schools. The other change is that, let me introduce myself. My name's Mike Scott Bowman. I was a history teacher for 35 years. I've written for GCSE and A-level and for the general reader on Israel and Palestine. Right, the other change is that very late in the day, we heard from Alistair Nunn of Pearson's that he couldn't attend and speak to us after all. Very disappointed it came so late. He was going to be telling us about how Pearson's have commissioned parallel histories to produce online resources for the teaching of the subject at GCSE, but he now writes to say, we've decided a single announcement on our plans, which we will make freely available, would be the best option for us to ensure that we are sharing all information at the same point to all interested parties, and therefore I wouldn't be able to share any details with you. This is very disappointing. I might later, if the time seems right, just explain briefly for those that don't know about the Pearson textbook fiasco, but that can wait till later. So we're having a slightly longer session on the teaching of the GCSE. Then we hope to hear from Professor Rogan, and then we'll have a short break. And then after that break, we'll hear about the challenges of teaching the A-level. And then we'll hear from two undergraduates about their experiences of studying the subject when they were at school. I'm going to invite Diana Safir now, the program coordinator of the Balfour Project, to say a bit about the conduct of the workshop.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on a Saturday morning. We picked this day because it needed to be a non-school day, and we understand that not everyone is able to attend on a Saturday for family commitments, religious reasons, and so forth. So we will be recording this workshop and putting it on our website afterwards. So please do share it with any teachers or anyone that you think might find any of the content useful. I will say that we are recording the video and the audio. We will be making a note of different links or resources that people post in the chat box, and we really encourage people to post anything relevant into the chat box. But we won't be sharing the chat box as such. So we're not going to be sharing the list of attendees or anything like that. We might share some of the interesting links and resources that get posted in there. We would ask that you please put any questions that you have. We have a few opportunities for Q&A for the different speakers. So please put your questions in the chat box, and we will try to get through as many as possible. From previous experience, we always have far more questions than we have time, but we'll try to get through as many of the different questions and points that come up. Also, we hope it goes without saying, but we'll say it anyways. Please be respectful and kind in the chat box. We don't mind debate. We encourage debate, but please do it in a respectful way. We won't tolerate any kind of abuse towards our speakers or any of the other attendees. So please be mindful of that. If there are any comments as such, then we will probably send you a private little message asking you to maybe tone it down a bit, and we will remove anyone that we find disruptive, because we want to keep the chat box open. It's very different to our webinars where we have the chat box closed, so the attendees can't interact with each other. This is very much a workshop style, and we want you to interact with each other. But yes, we will be keeping an eye on that. So please, don't make us regret that decision. I think that's all from me. So I will hand back to Mike.
Right, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Sophia Lopez-Khan, the ex-head of history at Buxton School in Waltham Forest in London, to tell us a bit about why she introduced this topic at GCSE and some of the challenges and practicalities of teaching the subject. So over to you, Sophia.
Just give her a minute to join as a panelist.
Right.
Hi, Mike. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for allowing me the opportunity to speak on this panel. And so, yes, as Mike said, I'm the ex-head of history. I recently left school in April of this year. And previous, I have taught the content for conflict in the Middle East successfully. And it's a very unlikely topic, some of you might know, to offer at GCSE, certainly in your average community or comprehensive school, and certainly in East London. But I do feel that it is hugely relevant for many different reasons. So I'll go into those now. So you might think, why teach it? I do think it's our responsibility as history teachers to be able to offer different demographics of students the opportunity to learn such an important topic. It's so current, and it certainly gives the top tier students the equipment, I think the knowledge equipment that they might need later on. And it would give them, and you'd probably find from some of our top students, I think one of whom will be speaking today, that it puts them in great stead later when they find themselves in competitive situations, when compared with other top students from different institutions, and certainly private institutions as well. So talking about the relevance to the demographic, huge mix of ethnic minorities in our, call them minorities, they're actually the majority in our school, those from Eastern Europe, the ex-Portuguese colonies, Black and Asian descent. We have quite a small minority of white British students, but not that it matters. It's just the mix, the eclectic mix of pupils. And so we, as a department, I felt that it was our responsibility to offer as many global topics, globally focused topics as possible, and to avoid Eurocentricity wherever we could. The school also consists of mainly boys as well, so I found it important to be able to engage both sexes in order to sort of, as part of our differentiation process, it's always important to remember. So world-based topics, I do feel that it's the responsibility of a head of history to be able to do that. I also come from an IB teaching background where I was in charge of the IB for history at an international school in Hong Kong. And so I learned a lot about writing independent schemes of work that reflected not only what it is that you could do as a history teacher, but also what it is that you had the power to offer as well. So I think that especially where schools are, I know definitely from speaking to subject advisor that schools tend to just offer one thing, and they do tend to just sort of be in the remit of, we're going to stick to teaching Nazi Germany, we're going to stick to teaching, Weimar Nazi Germany, we're going to stick to teaching the superpower relations in the Cold War. And I think you'll find that certain things have been cut out as well from the Cold War as well, which, you know, would have a world-based focus, such as Vietnam. Anyway, I just think that it speaks highly of any institution that can offer this. And I've talked briefly about the top tier students in a school like ours, particularly. It is so important to engage those top tier students, and they are there, and they usually choose history at GCSE because they love it. And I found that our students were choosing our topics because we were offering such, I suppose, unusual topics such as conflict in the Middle East, and it really engaged their interest. Also offering the Mao's China in conjunction as the modern debt study, that was also with this topic, that was also something that piqued their interest. And I found they just thought it found them in good stead for relevant knowledge or current knowledge later on. So how challenging is the delivery? So let's just go on to that, particularly for new staff, and at what stage in the 2-year GCSE should it be taught? So this is very important, because I think that when you're leading the subject, you can get caught up in what can I deliver in the right amount of time, and that's going to be every head of histories and history teacher's nightmare, trying to fit it all in. And how do I make it so that everything I do offer, I can safely say this has been covered? So all the new topics that are unfamiliar are going to be challenging to an extent. We have to read, we have to do that, we have to do our reading and our research, and that has to happen in one's own time. But of course, that's why we're history teachers, and there won't ever be a time that history teachers and teachers in general are not overworked. So we just have to accept that as read. And it can be very hard to break the mold of the plan for the coming academic year, because we feel safer knowing that we have this and we have this plan in place for the previous topic. So why change it if it's not broken? We just need to make sure we get those results. But we can equally get good results or better results. And it's not just about the results, is it? It's about the knowledge that you're going to equip students with and the power that has for them. So you have to decide what's important to you and to your department and to your students. Anyway, so with the 2-year GCSE, I do think that it is probably, I know this might cause controversy. I don't know if many schools are offering a 3-year GCSE still, but we had to change from a 3-year to a 2-year in the last couple of years. So I would say, having moved, that the 2-year delivery probably gleans a better result, just if you keep things tight. For as long as you plan your year and the time spent delivering properly, then I think it can definitely be done. So I began with paper 1, which is the environmental study, and our environmental study was crime and punishment, and then moved on to paper 2, and the medieval depth option, because chronologically it kind of works, and for us it was the Henry and his ministers. So there was kind of a crossover and a tie, particularly if you're looking at small portions of knowledge, such as witchcraft and vagabondage, and then of course looking at sort of crimes when it comes to the church and heresy and treason. It crosses over nicely into those sort of knowledge-based papers where AO2 seems to be the skill. And then you can softly introduce so those soft skills of paper 1, if you can call them soft skills, stand you in good stead later when the harder depth study skills can be focused on and practiced in the next term. So it's important to carefully time the introduction of the papers in tandem with the maturity of the students, and only you know your students. So for us, that tends to be at the latter part of year 10, I find. So I'd introduce the depth study, so the Mao's China, towards the sort of second half of the summer term, or sorry, towards the first half of the summer term, and sort of start to end it towards the second part. And then in the year 11, we can begin that year 11 term really drilling down on the conflict in the Middle East. Because let's not lie, there are lots of things that are difficult to teach about it, and it can be difficult to teach. It can be certainly very emotive to teach, but the key thing is to understand the maturity of your students and the ability and trust in the ability of your students via age maps, and the sense that you get in the second half of the 2-year GCSE of their ability to be able to deal with some of these issues and look at the knowledge correctly in the way that you would like. And a lot of that is going to be down to your delivery. This is mainly a knowledge-based paper, But of course, to pique the interest, you do have to engage some of the debate about it. But doing this in as neutral fashion as possible. It's your job as the history teacher to be able to do this. So I know it sounds like an unnecessary breakup of papers, but in my experience, the weakest of the students in history tend to struggle if it's introduced too early in the 2-year GCSE, and certainly not in a 3-year GCSE. There are many concepts about the imperial roots of the conflict that need to be addressed, and the nature of the conflict itself. So I do find, I'm repeating myself, but they tend to be mature enough towards the end, towards that first part of the year 11, to understand the connection of such concepts of the conflict. The high political terms as well, it's quite a lot of that. Again, all knowledge-based, but it's something to bear in mind. And as I said, the emotive nature of the topic that will inevitably engage students via their sense of justice, but also via their learning about the world currently. So you must be prepared to answer difficult questions in a way that is both factual and impassive, but without being robotic. So I just think that you probably already know all of this. So how have I found teaching it? So I don't know how much time I've got left, but delivery was not without its challenges. Certainly it is challenging, I'm not going to lie, but then so is the delivery of quite a lot of things. But it is best delivered, again, towards the end of year 10. I find that is definitely easier, having done it both ways, mostly in year 11. They've got that emotional maturity. They're already into the swing of learning about things. They've already got the other topics under their belt. So they're able to absorb far more information, which is obviously what you need here. The practice of narrative accounts of specific events can also be better practiced because they've done it so much, and the skills involved are not as challenging as the source-based papers. So really it's just about learning that content, and memorization and repetition of the key events is going to be of central importance. The textbook, Hodder, it's what we've used, mostly due to time constraints. We try to cover as much as we can in the shortest time, addressing the main inquiry questions from the syllabus, with practice homework for exams due every week. So that's really important. So we do this from the start of year 10, and it becomes such a priority. It's important that your school policy and the staff and the department are on board with this, otherwise it just doesn't work. There's a centralized place to monitor the results. It's quite prosaic, actually. And then when we have department meetings every 2 weeks, it's a key thing to talk about how students are doing with their practice questions in their homework. Sometimes we might do it in the lesson as well, but it is obviously easier to sort of mark and give back. The high level of organization comes hand in hand with teaching the world-based topics. You should also split the writing of lessons between all your staff, I find, so that you do have a base of what your lesson should look like. Your lesson format template should have all these key skills embedded into it, so that in that, I mean, ideally starting from key stage 3, but if you haven't already, then it is so important to be able to say, to recognize these are the skills that we're learning for these topics, for these papers at all times, and then point them out whenever they become relevant within the lesson format or the structure or whatever you're offering. So things like keywords, fulfilling the objective rather than getting sidetracked with the debate. There will be a time for this when the course concludes or towards the end, and it ought to be delivered like any other heavy knowledge-based paper. So I'd advise any staff commencing the teaching to just do their reading research during the summer. I mean, I don't know how, I hope that that's sort of a useful snapshot into the teaching of it, but I've tried to sort of cover the practical as well as the idea that you're teaching it in good time.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure we'll have questions put to you later, but I'm now going to introduce Jo Deutsch Harrison, who's head of history at Cheltenham College, and her colleague Alex Eldred, who both teach the international IGCSE on the Middle East. So, Jo.
Hi, Mike. Thank you. Thanks, Sophia. I thought I'd start just with the composition of our school, because for this, for us, this is kind of one of the principal challenges for us, even before we start teaching. We're an independent school, we're in a market town, a spa town in the west of England. We are overwhelmingly white. I checked, and in terms of pupils listing their religion, many prefer not to say, but we have 6 pupils who choose to list their religion as Islam and 6 who list Judaism. We have equal boys and girls. We're not highly selective at all. And we have six pupils whose country is either, who live in the region, their countries are Saudi, UAE and Oman, but we don't have any others living in the region or with kind of strong home connections there. Why did we choose to introduce the topic? We picked it as an opportunity with the specification change back in 2012. And we teach it alongside, as Sophia mentioned, the kind of much more common topics. We do IGCSE, run GCSE, but we do it alongside interwar America, interwar Germany, and then the Cold War. We do find that those 3 other units, which are much more common and also much quicker to get through, give us quite helpful context for the Middle East unit. And we position it after we've done America and Germany, in the 4th form, and then in year 10, and then as we end year 10, so we are just starting to introduce it at the moment. We spent 3 weeks on it so far, and then it is their first unit going into year 11. And the reason we do that is because for us, we run mocks in January of year 11, and because it's challenging, we want it to be in the mock examination. And then the last unit that we do, which is the Cold War, and the way the IGCSE, the EdXL one that we do is set up, that repeats technique from year 10. So they're not having to absorb new technique, and they have relatively little content in that unit just to get through when they're really desperate to get to the end and finish. Rather selfishly, we chose it because we thought it was a chance to keep our own grasp of history fresh and challenged. And as Sophia said, a huge amount of kind of reading, subject knowledge, which is challenging, but also grows us as historians. We find it as a topic really engaging and challenging, and we seeing our pupils grow. They grow both as historians, but I think also as global citizens. And for us, that's a challenge. We're desperate to get them outside of the privileged bubble that they live in here. We find it a key way to examine Britain's role in international affairs. What everyone thinks about Michael Gove, his approach to history as a kind of celebratory island story, we find it, it's a step away from that, or at least a way to balance that. When we chose it, all staff, as Sophia mentioned, I think this is vital, all staff were very much on board, and it was partly promoted by a Manchester graduate who'd read for a degree in Middle Eastern Studies at Manchester University, who was passionate about the subject and really felt that it needed to be promoted as low down the school as we felt they could cope with it, rather than reserving it for A-level, for example. Imran will probably counter me on that. And we find it an amazing chance, obviously, to discuss tolerance, the understanding of difference, the need for empathy. Secondarily, and kind of lesser in our considerations, but it is helpful, it helps promote our EDI agenda and evidencing that in inspections as well. I thought I'd start maybe with some of the downsides that we've kind of had to encompass and anticipate before thinking again about some of the positives that we've definitely found enriching. I asked one of our higher attaining pupils, their perspective was that it's difficult due to just with the course that we do, it starts in 1917 and goes through to 2012. So it's the study in breadth. And they commented that it's difficult just in terms of how long it is. There's a kind of sense of exhaustion as you reach some of the Gaza wars towards the end of the specification. So that breadth element, as it often is in history, is challenging. But we do feel on the upside that builds them. Once they've gone through, we're noticing with COVID, and I'll talk a bit more about which bits we chose to cut for COVID when we were given the chance to cut content. We're noticing with our A-level students that they haven't done this unit, and in terms of marshalling information and the kind of the complexity of the ideas and the perceived difficulty and real difficulty of the subject in places, the topic, we're noticing that they haven't studied it with our current A-level students. This high attaining people also mentioned the complexity of the different perspectives. In comparison to other units, it's not basically just how the US are kind of experiencing the Cold War. It's very much through multiple lenses and views. Names and language, the amount of similar wars getting lost and being able to tell them apart. Geography can be challenging to some. We do a lot on geography and we enjoy doing that, but they find the territorial changes after various wars can be confusing. They really struggle with some of the fine print that the edXL GCSE requires in terms of attempts at peace. Some struggle with the terrorism element, you know, whether we're looking at the King David Hotel bombings or Dia Sin or kind of later in the 70s. You know, there's real strength of opinions, some quite heated arguments. I think you can see that as a positive, as well as it sometimes being challenging for the pupils. From a teacher perspective, one teacher commented that they find it really helps to be patient and to have trust that we are, as Sophia suggested, I think, really looking towards the kind of end game of building historians long term, rather than necessarily getting drawn into that trap of being too focused on chewing through content, maybe pleasing the deputy head academic with the results, you know, and passing the exam in the more short term. So it does, you do feel like you're sort of slightly out there because it's not an easy unit to deliver and get the results on. But I'll come back to kind of how the pupils feel about the fact that they've done it in the end. The other thing that teachers tend to worry about is simply the content. And when we were offered the opportunity with edXL to cut content to compensate for COVID in 21 and 22, this was the unit that we lost. And there was obviously careful consideration of that and some emotion involved because we are passionately committed to it. But it was the one we were most worried about in 2020 before the exams were cancelled and children had already lost learning. Sophia mentioned the nightmare, and it really is, it's so common to be fighting the curriculum time pressure in history and as historians, and that is a real consideration that one has to plan for. And I think what Sophia said about keeping it tight is absolutely vital. There's a perception for some teachers, typically as they join the department, less so after they delivered it, that it's heavy material. A new teacher who joined us last year listed their concerns as being terminology, bias and subjectivity, the dangers of unwittingly having a slant, you know, that sort of subconscious bias, the difficulty of neutrality and having to challenge oneself on that all the time. Many teachers don't have necessarily degree level understanding, and so subject knowledge can be a challenge. I personally find that very common in teaching history. It's very rare that I've taught anything I actually studied for my degree. That was a long time ago. Textbooks are controversial, as Mike has kind of alluded to, and there tends to be a tendency in most textbooks, we've looked at as many as we can preview, to offer either too much or too little. We have actually found the edXL 1-9 version, which has now been pulled, very, very text heavy, and we have to use it quite judiciously with the pupils or they just drown in it. There's a lot of war. It often feels a bit more like a politics rather than a history course. There's a lot about dates, the focus on individual leaders, the final peace negotiations. The fact that the conflict can appear as so intractable can be a bit depressing. And some of the work on deals and treaties comes across as a bit dry. So that feels like that's a lot of potential issues to have to address. But on the flip side, the rewards are huge. I mean, there's the obvious relevance. This is what staff notice and what pupils notice, and parents for us as well. It supports most of our other 20th century history courses. And there's so much, this is a pupil comment, there's so much they notice the interweaving of issues relating to sort of refugees, migration, empire, the Cold War, modern conflict, and how that's evolving terror, nationalism, the shifting global balance of power between sort of evolving nation states, and the currency and the consistency of that, and the fact that every single year we teach this, we have to update slides if we're using PowerPoints. It has to constantly be under review. We find that challenging, and being able to share that with children is rewarding. As teachers, we find it a really positive, good way to debate absolute ideas about right and wrong and what is morally right and wrong. Clear-cut answers seem to be frequently difficult or non-existent, and the idea of a dual narrative that kind of runs counter to counter-culture we find very helpful. I think as historians and as young growing citizens, it's really good for them to have to straddle the fence for a bit and feel a little uncertain maybe about where they sit, what it's okay to say and ask, and considering shades of grey in a world that seems to, I mean, I woke up this morning to the news about Roe v. Wade, to be so polarized, where we have so many culture wars, whether they're directly related to the Middle East or in other areas. It's a way to weave in multiple perspectives that we and the pupils definitely find challenging, but I think it's work worth doing. The source work is interesting. It's not a specified skill of this unit in the IGCSE that we do, but pupils love extension work. We looked at textbook debate in extension sessions, and they were fascinated that their textbooks are being rewritten as they study and being argued over at such a level. And we looked at some of the sources in the different books in doing that. Again, high attaining people really appreciated the fact that this is a shift, as Sophia said, away from Western narratives. It's less European navel gazing. It challenges the sort of, the idea of the US, the West, formerly the UK, sort of, being dominant in geopolitics and the things we choose to study there. I absolutely agree with Sophia that this feeds directly into uptake at A-level and also at university, and longer term engagement with history, which I think is so vital, and we really seek to encourage that, whether or not they're carrying on with it academically. University historians, Oxbridge historians, pupils who then later travel to the region and report back and sort of say, why haven't you led a trip there? You say, well, there's this reason, this reason, this reason. But they want to go and see it. They kind of do, I guess, the armchair traveling with us, and then they will go and they bring back posters and they tell us who they've met and where they've been on both sides of the divide. It's the most commonly reported favourite unit at the end of IGCSE, no matter how much they feel the challenge as they're going through it. And it is the one that going into the exam they're most worried about categorically because of the level of challenge. It's the unit that they are most proud of studying. They become, and we try to tell them at the start, you're probably going to know a lot more about this than your parents by the end of it, and it really matters. Parental reaction is interesting as well. Lots of them say to us in parents' meetings that they wish I'd studied that. They feel that they have an inferior grasp compared to their pupils, and they enjoy talking to their children about it when they go home, when they leave us as a boarding school. They like parents that it's not all Europe, World War II, and kind of the history that they remember maybe. Very quickly, a brief word on the opportunity for activities. I love to do reenactments. We've had some trouble with these. You definitely don't want to put them on social media because anything out of context is so difficult to manage, even if your marketing department are asking for that kind of content. But the pupils really like them, and it helps with geography and considering, for example, maybe how far it's a kind of David and Goliath situation at any one point in time. It also gets them moving. There's a lot of thinking and there's kind of a lot of text, and anything you can do to make it more active, I think, is, whether it's linear graphs or those sorts of things. Their conceptual understanding of change and continuity and having the language and the kind of schema to articulate that high level, higher order historical thinking can really be used, I think, to undergird the scheme of work when you first set it up from the start. We found Anna Fielding's article in March 2015 in the Historical Association's Teaching History really helpful. She actually practiced with change and continuity on the China unit and different ways of approaching this rather than just logging through the content of the spec. Again, we found teaching history really helpful. My colleague Alex found this when we got to the Roadmap for Peace, 2003 Roadmap for Peace, which is towards the end of our unit. There's a wonderful article about using roadmaps. It's titled Speed Cameras, Dead Ends, Drivers and Diversions, and some examples of pupil work. And we've done the same now with our pupils, even using weather to kind of illustrate how things are going, and exploring judgments visually and using these to kind of see the wood for the trees when they're in danger of sometimes collapsing under the weight of the detail has been really helpful and fun. It's a very different way of teaching. And there's an obvious opportunity for debate, which we probably don't do enough of in some of our other units. Parallel histories is really, really good on how to kind of integrate these and pace them through a scheme of work so that they drive your teaching. And obviously in terms of presenting a balanced perspective, that really helps as well. But I would encourage anyone who's considering it, anyone who's sort of nervous about kind of lacking the subject knowledge or the kind of topicality, the controversiality, just to go for it, because I think the benefits are immense. And I think the challenge for teachers and for pupils is one that's well worth embracing. Thank you.
Jo, thank you very, very much indeed. I'm now going to ask Deanna to field the questions and put them to you and Sophia and your colleague, Alex.
Hello. Let me just bring Sophia back. If you could turn your camera on, that'd be great. We've had a couple of questions, and we're joined by Alexandra. please do post in the chat box if you've got any questions. I found it super interesting, Joe, that you said that it was the section that they were most proud of doing at GCSE level. That was really heartwarming. So we got a question from Mohammed Amla. Good morning. Thank you, Joe, for highlighting the positives and the challenges. What additional support, resources, and training would teachers need to help navigate the challenges you mentioned?
I think finding a textbook that works at the right level for your pupils collectively is probably the thing that gives teachers the most sense of security in terms of knowing that they can find digestible information. That's quite hard to do at the moment because of the debate over textbooks. There is one that's kind of part of a kind of revised Ben Walsh series that I think is about the right level of detail to cover the challenging spec that Edexcel have got for the IGCSE, but also being readable and digestible. Can you remind me of the question again, Deanna?
What additional support, resources, and training would teachers need to help navigate the challenges you mentioned?
I think having the support of your school leadership is really important as well. Our head is really keen that we're promoting this topic. Alex and I are both a little bit nervous about being involved in this workshop and the fact that it's recorded, but our head is very supportive and supportive of the fact that our children are engaging in it. And I think having staff on board and being able to plan ahead so that staff have the time. Not all staff want to give up their holidays to subject knowledge and preparing lessons and preparing ahead. And I totally understand why. Holidays really matter and we earn them in blood, sweat and tears. But I think introducing this unit, you would have to factor in where is the time in the term time for them to do it and prepare and for us to discuss as a department before we deliver. And then where is the time in the holidays if staff should choose to do that as well. Because that's what makes you feel exposed, is when you haven't had time to get your own head around some of this complex stuff.
Thanks for that. We've got a question from Gillian Mosley. I'm really pleased she's joining us today. For those of you who don't know, Gillian is a documentary filmmaker and she comes from a Zionist background, and she made a documentary recently and it's called The Tinderbox. We had a screening for the Balfour Project with a Q&A. The Q&A is on our website. But if you get the opportunity to watch The Tinderbox, which I know Gillian would happily be share in terms for use in schools and so forth. It's a journey, her journey of sort of from her Zionist background to sort of, let's say, a more moderate view, and when she went out there, what she learned. It's got interviews from different people on all the sides, and very atypical people that she's interviewed as well, not the sort of normal people that the usual people I should say that you see in these documentaries. So it's a fantastic bit of work. Anyway, she is here, and Gillian, if you wouldn't mind posting the link to the website where they can find out more about the Tinderbox, that'd be super helpful. She says, sorry if I missed this, but if you're teaching this, does it tend to be only British colonial subjects pupils are learning? If so, what is the general reaction to the Britain's colonial legacy? I guess, is it in the context of British colonial legacy that you're learning about Israel-Palestine?
Joe, do you want to speak first, or?
Yeah, sure. We do, I don't know if you can see the books behind me, but we do a lot on empire. It's what we choose to do for our non-examined assessment in the upper sixth. So this is really helpful for us for introducing kind of imperial concepts. I think for Sophia, it's probably a rather different experience just because of how the units are designed. Our unit begins with Balfour Declaration and kind of the British role in setting so much up in the Middle East. And the children, with the kind of context, the heat of the debate about empire at the moment, which they are aware of, and certainly by the time they get to the sixth form, they're actually drawing on that in their work. They can see Britain's role, and our unit kind of very much focuses on that but in a much kind of more global context of kind of the impact of some of the decisions and promises that Britain made and didn't keep. So it fits nicely for us in the Edexcel IGCSE, and then leading into our A-level understanding, definitely with imperial concepts, I would say, and the heat and sort of at times fury of that debate.
For us, in terms of, we're not an A-level school, so we are all through school is from key stage, well, 1 really, to, so we're a nursery all the way up to a GCSE. And so it is rather different. We're actively decolonizing the curriculum school as well, which I tended to have done around 10 years ago. But of course, I think in the last 3 years, it became much more relevant to be able to say that every curriculum in the school needs to address the colonial past of Britain, and the impact, and be very aware, if you're going to lead each of the departments, be very aware of the impact of Britain's colonial past. It is very much in the context of this in our school. It might just be unique to our school. We actively participated in something called the Prosperity Project throughout the year. And I don't know, it's something that it's a group that the school had employed to help enable the teachers to do this. It does, in terms of reaction, it does depend on your pupils, I find. With ours, it's very much like everything's Greek to them. There is no context. There's just Britain's colonial past it doesn't come with any prior knowledge about it, and often to discover that there's a personal impact or personal point of view from their own families is kind of a surprise to them. It's odd and it's difficult to explain. But say, for example, at Key Stage 2, they might learn about the Kingdom of Benin, and then in history, at Key Stage 3, they might learn about Egypt, or something like, what do we do? At Year 9, we wrote an entirely Black curriculum. So we began with immigration since 1945, and then they are surprised at things like the Windrush generation, even though they know of it. It's difficult. And then later on, looking at US civil rights and then UK civil rights, which of course they've not even really heard of. This is very much written by our department, and we've taken this on in order to form part of the curriculum, but also to fulfill the need to learn about our demographic, and for our demographic to learn about themselves. So by the time it gets to GCSE, they do have, I'd like to think a lot of them do have some personal political concept, but of course not all of them do. And by the time it comes to sort of picking, they will have chosen because of this awareness. And as Joe had said, it really does form part of the appeal to know these things about themselves and where they and their families might fit in to this concept of being British or being part of the British Empire in whichever imperial context they choose to disseminate from this. And there is a lot of debate. It can be quite emotive. But again, I think it's only a good thing that self-awareness comes into this. I don't know if that answers the question properly, but yeah, I do think it depends on your demographic of students and what kinds of kids you have, really.
Thank you so much for that, both of you. We've got loads of people posting resources in the chat box. We will make a note of those. We're going to email all registrations, all attendees and people that have registered for this with the relevant links that have been posted so that people can have a look at them and share them and so forth. Sorry. On this topic of Britain's colonial past, we had a conference a couple of weeks ago that I wanted to raise about, it was entitled Abandoning Palestine, the End of the British Mandate and Our Continuing Responsibility. So we had day 1, which was about the collapse of the British Mandate, and day 2, why it still matters and what Britain should do now. The recordings are on the website. I will post a link to that as well. So as well as all of our past webinars. So if you wanted to come at the topic from a specific angle, whether it be child detainees, whether it be, you know, agriculture and occupation, we have lots of topics that could be a sort of hook or a way in. But do check out the conference. Like I said, I'll post the link in there. We've had a question from Michael Vint. These are fantastic presentations. How extensive is the audience? What number of participants are engaged in this event? Really pleased to say that we had about 195 people register for this, which was far more than we expected. And we've got currently about 72 people here. The Balfour Project will be putting this on the website and sharing it afterwards extensively. We know from past webinars that we have people watching our webinar recordings hundreds and hundreds of times. We also put them on as audio so people can listen to it as a podcast format if they prefer. So we're very excited because this feels like the type of event that can lead to some actionable change and some positive change. Just getting lots of positive comments, which I want to share with you all, because it's always nice to hear nice words. From Basia Gordon, thank you so much, Joe. So inspiring, we have the same reaction. Pupils want to know more. And she says, I'll look up Anna Fielding. And so the next question, this is from Gumilar Surya Ramadan from Indonesia. The question is how to teach interesting, enjoyable, and fun Israel-Palestinian history to students so that they're not bored. Do you make it not boring, basically?
I think speakers is great. I think we've had someone from Solutions Not Sides come in actually before. That's always fantastic engagement. Outside speakers and even people from university. There's so many people, PhD students that want to do workshops. Of course, you have to check them out first and have those proper interviews with them. But it's not a topic that lacks for resources in that sense. I'm a great fan of hooks at the start, starting hooks, and I think it's important to sit with your department and to really talk about the outstanding lesson and to be on the same page, particularly with the outstanding lesson. What does that look like? And does it deliver results? As Joe has mentioned, this is like, you have to condense this. This is huge breadth that you have to fit in to a certain amount of time. And as I said, for us, it begins at the start of year 11, and you have to really hit the ground running with it. And you have to trust that your students have learned enough skill by this time to be able to, like, those AO2 skills are just coming, and that AO1 skill has to just keep being practiced. That has to come in to the lesson constantly. So no matter what fun things you might do, there's that. But also there's the serious side. I mean, it's this serious topic, and there's only so much fun in such a serious topic. I don't know, let me talk about China. China's 20th century history is horrendous, in a word. And how do you teach horrendous things? You can't teach it in a light-hearted way. And I don't think you can teach the conflict in the Middle East in a I'm not suggesting that fun is light-hearted, but it does suggest it. There are methods, and it's just about creativity, I think. So just as an example, we use silent debate quite a lot, particularly, I don't know if anyone's heard of a silent debate, but it's just a tool. So you might write, and it's a great thing if they're doing, for explain why questions, this is not that good, but certainly for the source topics and the AO3 ones is great. But it's a good engagement. So you just write different questions onto bubbles, into bubbles on A3 sheets, and you dot them around the room, and you get students to get up, and they can't talk to each other, but they can argue with each other via writing this on each of the A3 sheets. And they have to go around, and they do get so engaged with it, and they do end up arguing vehemently with each other. And of course, then you give direction. Everything they say must have it must have a point. It must be backed up with evidence. It cannot be offensive. You can't just say yes or no. You have to actually use the evidence in order to give an answer. So that's just a small example. Another example might be entirely that you make something up. So when we do China, the Lysenko lesson, I don't know if anyone knows about this, but he was a so-called economist who came to China via Russia. He was sent there to help collectivization or to sort of increase agricultural production, and he botched it badly. And so we do the Lysenko game, and this is something I just made up, and I give everyone's put into groups. There's a lot of group work in our school. In fact, all the tables are constantly laid out as groups, because the focus has to be you're the facilitator and they do the work. So everybody got like sort of different variables for how grain should grow. Can it grow like this? Can it grow? And they really have to talk about it, and they really have to think, well, is this going to make grain grow, or is it not going to make the rice grow? Is it going to make things better or worse? And then it really gets them thinking, and then you keep giving them the different scenarios. And so that's just another example. So it really is about getting your creative hat on with your teachers, maybe getting a bit competitive with your department as well, who can create the best resources. We really like a resource in our school. The sorts of things like, how do you make card sorts really last? It can't just be, put this into chronological order. It's got to be, well, we need to regroup this. There's something else. The reasons this happened, all of the different like causes and consequences, group this into causes, group this into consequence, then resort it into order of importance, make a diamond 9 of importance, stuff like that. So it's just about taking what you already know and then running it creatively and getting together, because obviously more heads is better than one, and really being on board with it. It's just, and having that knowledge to do it as well.
I wondered if I might just add something there, because I totally agree. It's about drawing on all the skills of your team, as a classroom teacher, and it's a topic that allows for, if you've got someone who is into geography, because, quite a lot of people will teach humanities, not just history. There's a real chance to draw on those extra skills of the people that you've got in your department, and use that, as you say, Sophia, like the hook to get people in. I'm head of politics. There's loads of news stories that you can use to kind of trigger a debate, get the lesson going, and it gives the children a real chance to see the relevance of what you're doing. And I think that's how you make it. I think the word that was used was, how do you make it fun? And I think that's how you make it fun in the way you deliver it.
And I absolutely agree with Alex, and I think Gamina as well, because it's such an important question in terms of fun. You can use the range of activities that you would like Sophia said, for any kind of other lesson or other topic, but there are online clips. They're not all a minefield. They are easy to find, easy to use. They often explain for you very well things that you might be struggling to explain, whether it's Andrew Roberts, or I'm trying to think who we've used recently, Jeremy Bowen, and it's not like everything is deeply contested. There are quite straightforward explanations. I love using music. When people's come into my lessons, they would be playing different sort of Middle Eastern music. They really do embrace the difference. I'd love to be able to get food into it somehow. There are lots of cartoons, political cartoons as a way of analysing things visually, which is kind of often easier. And I think it's like a lot of these more challenging topics. I think if you set it up with the children at the outset as, this is gritty, this is going to be really hard, we're going to find that we argue, and this is possibly going to take us into areas that, where we have people, I don't know, leaving comments on our social media feeds that are difficult, and then they will engage with that. I think kind of being explicit about the challenge at the start gets them on board quite often. And then it's fun for them, because they can see that this is something that's live and that's real.
Thank you. You mentioned food. We actually have a fellowship program for university students at the Balfour Project, where we give them a small little grant and they do a project related to Israel-Palestine, depending on what their interest is. We have like religious studies students, history, politics, law, etc. This one group of this year's fellows are doing a couple of webinars in the next few weeks. So sign up to our mailing list if you haven't already, if you want to find out about it. But they are doing one on food in the region. So they're going to have some bloggers and some chefs and so forth. And then they're also doing archaeology from the region and architecture. So they're going to be super exciting, run by our fellows, a sort of fellows takeover of our monthly webinars. So keep an eye out for those. I think they'll be great. Gillian Mosley, the director of the Tinderbox, posted her link and her email in the chat box. Like I said, all of these links we're going to share with all the people that are registered. But it was tinderboxfilm.com from memory. Do check that out. It's an excellent resource. She's got an hour version and an hour and a half version. So that's, again, I recommend it. I think it's fantastic. And I also wish that the three of you were my teachers. You sound amazing. Not that I would ever go back to school, but we've got a question from Hadia. She's given us two, but I'm going to take one of them because we're running out of time now. Well, I'm going to combine two questions. Hadia asks, do students take sides, and does this cause issues? And Adam Carr asks a similar question. Do pupils end up having prejudice towards one side or the other? Could it cause more anti-Semitism when they leave school?
Yes, is the short answer for me. We have 47% Muslim students in our school. But again, as I said before, it does depend on your kids. Mine don't have any real concept of this at all. Like, so for them, it's all going to be new knowledge. And yes, it is. Somebody mentioned before unconscious bias, especially when you're teaching. This is just something you have to acknowledge. But it's better to acknowledge it than to say everything is red, that, you know, we don't have that and we're all such neutral parties. The important thing is to know your stuff, really, and to present it in the way that will, in the end, give them the knowledge to pass, but also not shy away from what's difficult about the debate. You are their teacher, they look to you for that. It can be, of course, it can be difficult, but regardless, students' home environment is going to impact them as well. It isn't just their school. So whatever prejudices they might have from home, and this is in all walks of life, not just if they're Muslim or if they're not, they are going to parrot things that are said at home, and they are going to show that as well. We get it so much with our boys in the way that they treat girls. And again, it's for you as the teacher to be able to recognize that and to correct it where possible. But I don't think it's necessarily that different from other topics. This is just because this is so current that it can be quite, I keep saying emotive, but it is. But I don't see how it's that different from Weimar Nazi Germany or even Russia. There are so many things to talk about when it comes to debate about race in particular, when it comes to religion, gender roles, and many other things. And yeah, it is important to address it if it does come up. And yeah, there will be official avenues to be able to do that, and Solutions Not Sides is something I think that one could definitely turn to help with this, and some training that one could get if one's not confident beforehand. I like to, I mean, I've done training with the Holocaust Educational Trust. I would definitely recommend them to go to when it comes to certainly looking at how to deliver topics that are relevant to Jewish people, Israelis, but equally, I think there are quite a few different official sites or sources that one can go to for training if one isn't that clued up or if one is unsure. But yeah, sorry, I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that.
I very much agree with you, Sophia, about the we are required in our school, and I'm sure all schools, to teach with balance. So we definitely spend more time than the spec requires for the Germany unit that we teach on teaching the Holocaust. We're deeply looking into how we kind of embedded it even lower down before they opt for history. We've worked with Huni Kahan of the Holocaust Awareness Trust, taking children out to see Auschwitz. We're keen to promote the issue of Holocaust denial and get them questioning about that and how can that be. So I think kind of teaching with balance is critical, and one would need to consider where else in your offered curriculum you're looking at the Holocaust and how you're delivering that, and the kind of whole context. There was a very interesting question earlier from Roger Spooner about where do you start, and that's what you find when you're teaching the Middle East. The roots go so far back. We certainly don't start, although the spec does, in 1917. You can't really do 1917 without looking at Sykes-Picot and Hussein McMahon, but they're not even in the spec. And then, we actually start with the Romans. We can do the Arab Empire. We have to do it in about one lesson, the Arabs and then the Ottomans. And but again, I think that's where the children start to see history joining up. But yes, context and balance, I think, are critical, and you'd need to consider where else you can fit that in.
Thank you so much. I am going to end with one quick question because I think it's a really interesting one. And I think it was Joe that touched on how this is a history subject. You're teaching it in a history context, but it's covering things like politics and law and so forth. So Patricia Bank asks, do you discuss the role of international law, i.e. the UN, maybe the ICC, ICJ? And can I just add that we had a conference on this last year as well. I'll post a link in the chat box, but it was really interesting. We had Baroness Hale and a bunch of other high profile people speaking, really interesting people speaking on the issue of in search of rule of law in Israel-Palestine. But yes, do you touch on international law in the session?
We do a little insofar as it's required by the spec, because the UN, taking over from Britain with withdrawal is kind of critical, and then their role subsequently. And then we come back to that a bit when we're looking at the Cold War. Alex, can you add anything on that in terms of where we touch on it? I would say we stay away largely from international law, but the idea of the legality of what's going on is interesting.
Yeah, I would agree with Joe. It's as far as the spec allows, really. But yeah, an interesting thing to explore.
Fantastic. Well, ladies, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really sorry we tried to get through as many questions as possible. We haven't got through all of them. I will share the chat box with all the speakers today, so they will see everything. And like I said, we tried to touch on everything, but it's just so much, just like the topic itself, right? So thank you so much. I'm going to bring John McHugo, our trustee, in now, one of the Balfour Project trustees. Just bear with me while I promote him to panelist. And he will be introducing Eugene Rogan. So thank you again, everyone. And thank you everyone for the questions.
Deanna, is it over to me now?
Yes, it is. Hello, Eugene. Hello, John. Yes,
thank you so much, and welcome, Eugene. For those who don't know, he's stuck in some ghastly airport somewhere. Last I heard it was Schiphol, but he may have moved on to the next one. I don't know. It's a great pleasure to be just saying a couple of words. I'm going to introduce you, Eugene, but before I do that, a very brief word about the Balfour Project. As Deanna said, I'm one of its trustees. It originally started about 10 years ago, I suppose, because a group of concerned British citizens, many of them based in Scotland, incidentally, in fact, may have been a majority in those days, were worried about how Britain was going to mark the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration. And would it be marked in a way that was, I don't like using the word balanced, but I would say in a way that was objective. And that is how the Balfour Project was born. And then we incorporated it as a small educational charity, again up in Scotland. And if you look at our objects on our website, you will see that we're educational. We're particularly interested in Britain's historic responsibility, which is one of the reasons why today's workshop is taking place. And you also see that we talk about, as our objects being peace and reconciliation. And I would just leave you with this little syllogism. Well, I'm not sure if it's a syllogism, but one thing that follows from another. You can have no peace without justice, and you can have no justice without an adequate grasp and understanding of the history. So I'll just leave that little thought with you. And now it is my immense honour and privilege to introduce Eugene Rogan. He is Professor of the History of the Modern Middle East at St Antony's College, Oxford, and St Antony's Centre for the Study of the History of the Modern Middle East is one of the leading institutions for that purpose, not just in this country, but quite frankly, in the entire world. Eugene has been teaching there for 30 years. In 2017, he was awarded a fellowship of the British Academy, one of the supreme academic distinctions in this country. And I have to put in a mention of two of his books. The first one, they both have titles that say what is on inside the tin. The first is The Arabs, a History, which has been translated into 18 languages, incidentally. And the second is The Fall of the Ottomans, The Great War in the Middle East, 1914 to 1920. Very interesting, it's 1914 to 1920, not 1914 to 1918. And I suggest you read the book to find out why he's put it that way. Gulimar from Indonesia put something in the chat box a little while ago about talking about how do you make lessons interesting, enjoyable, and fun. And of course, we're talking about, as Sophia mentioned, we're talking about topics that aren't fun and aren't enjoyable. But even when they're talking about tragic events, Eugene's history books are written in a way that is enjoyable, interesting, and fun to read. And I don't think I need to say any more, but it's my great honor to pass over to you, Eugene, who's going to talk to us about why the study of Palestine and Israel, their history, is important in schools. Thank you so much.
John, thank you so much. And I am grateful to everyone at the Balfour Project for being so flexible this morning. I'm sorry that an involuntary change in my travel schedule has imposed this on you. I just want to make sure, because there's a lot of ambient noise behind me, that you're actually hearing me all right? Diana or John, could you just confirm?
We can hear you.
Very good. Well, if there at any point you can't, let me know. It's, as I said, a great pleasure to be with you, and on a subject that's very dear to my heart. The question of why we should be teaching Israel and Palestine in our high schools goes, I think, right to the very core of what any of us who teach the modern history of the Middle East believe, in terms of taking our message, which is so relevant, so fascinating, so rich, so important, so tragic, to all levels of the teaching enterprise. My own experience with high schools has come thanks to teachers who've reached out to me over the years to ask for my help with the teaching of a A-level module on the modern Middle East, which is available in a number of schools across the country for the A-level exam in history. And it's an important module. As I understand it, it represents 30 or 40% of the final grade. And the schools in Birmingham and in Oxford with which I've worked have really wonderful teachers who very clearly have inspired their students in a way that means by the time I get to them, I've been dealing with high school students who are well-read, who are very clued in. They, before COVID, they would come to the Middle East Center at Oxford and we'd have a seminar there as a kind of Q&A session. And they always came so well prepared. They had questions, which meant that they'd been doing the readings. They knew the things that they didn't understand or where they wanted clarification or where the issues of the debate seemed to them unresolved. And you know that when a student asks a question, that they're in pursuit of information they really want to know. And probably what you say to them is stuff they're really going to remember. So I'm always struck by the engagement of the students around this module. I think when I look at what's offered for A-level history, obviously the Tudors and the Nazis have their place, but I think our students today are more driven to find out more about the extra-European world than ever before. That really is what seems to me to be engaging their intellectual curiosity in university as well as in high school. And I think that's the case now more than ever. Obviously, since George Floyd's killing and the kind of globalization of the Black Lives Matter movement, it's really given rise to demands from students at secondary and tertiary education to decolonize the curriculum. There's a real pressure at university level to be moving beyond the kind of colonial narrative or an overly developed focus on the progress of the West, to engage in the history of Asia and Africa, Latin America, the global South, and to try and achieve a greater balance for citizens of the world who are going to be really engaging well beyond the limits of Britain or Europe. So I think that this whole notion of decolonizing the curriculum is one very clear reason why keeping Middle Eastern history, and particularly Israel-Palestine, at the heart of our high school curriculum is so important. I think it really plays to something our students want. And heaven knows, we want to keep them engaged in history. Responding to the things that really interest them seems like a natural solution. Then there is the present relevance of this subject, the unresolved nature of the conflict between Palestine and Israel, and all the ways that this plays through the news cycle, which for our students now in high school as in university, they're more aware of than ever before. Questions about what does it mean to normalize relations with Israel before you have normalized the situation of Palestine, the Abraham Accords, and the new movement for states, particularly in the Arab Gulf, as well as Sudan, as well as Morocco, to be normalizing relations with Israel as though all aspects of the Arab-Israeli conflict have now been settled, when obviously the Palestinian issue remains to be settled. It's clear the present relevance of Israel and Palestine is every day in our news cycle, and the problem hasn't gone away. And history is the key to addressing the problem. I think for students in the United Kingdom in particular, the issue of Israel and Palestine is absolutely of fundamental importance. There is a sense of historic responsibility that comes with the approach to this question, to this subject. It's not a question of naming and blaming, but since the Balfour Declaration, Great Britain has pursued policies that engendered a conflict, which since the withdrawal of the British Mandate in May of 1948, has only deepened and spread and remains unresolved down to the present day. So it's not something that young Britons can afford not to know about. They are inheriting a sense of historic responsibility. And as the problem remains unresolved, we'll be looking to a rising generation to pick up the baton and try and move forward towards a just and enduring peace to this long, unsettled question. And so I think for students in Britain, and I, with my American accent, would say the same holds for students in the United States, there is a sense of responsibility that comes from the political measures our countries have taken towards Israel, towards Palestine, towards the region, which really means that teaching this is something that we have to do as a matter of duty. And just listening to the last discussion, I think that there's something pedagogically and intellectually very important about teaching Palestine and Israel. This is not about indoctrination. And I really sympathize with what the teachers in the previous panel said about the importance of achieving balance in our teaching, of trying to provide two sides to the history of Israel and Palestine, because there are two sides. Our students are divided on this. They will come with idées fixes that come from around the dining table in their own homes, or in their communities, or in their temples, or in their mosques, or in their churches, or in the playing fields. And they bring all of that baggage along with everything that the media or cinema, television has fed them about Israelis, Palestinians, Arabs, Jews, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. And so the first thing you acknowledge is there is a plurality of views on this. And so how wonderful to have a subject where we can bring our students to encounter differing points of view and teach them respect for different points of view. There's no way around it. We have to listen to people we disagree with. And then to see where in the history we're teaching them, they can muster the data to try and make the case they wish to make better, so that we can train our students to be critical thinkers, to read with the kind of passion that comes with believing in a cause or a subject and wanting to make the case as persuasively as you can. And it's a question that leaves very few of our students untouched. They do engage, and they probably will take sides, and they will debate madly about this. It's everything we should be encouraging our students to do, but with respect, with knowledge, and never to give the platform to uninformed views or hateful views or views that in any way encourage incitement or racism or whatnot. So I think it's a hot topic. It's a dangerous topic in many ways. And for those reasons, we should embrace it because it will make it more interesting to our students. The challenge is on us to deliver it in a way which develops them and sets them up better for the challenges they face when they leave us in school. So I couldn't think of anything I'd rather be talking about with this group today than the importance of what you do. But I also want to extend a hand to all of you. I have really admired and respected the teachers who have reached out to me. It's been on their initiative to ask whether I would help in talking to their students and organizing seminars. And obviously, there are a lot of people in universities right across the country who teach Israel-Palestine, modern Arab history or politics. And I would really encourage you to reach out to faculty in your university. If you don't know anyone, get in touch with me. I'll be glad to put you in touch with people. And if you're near enough to come visit Oxford, I will open our doors to you or pop down to your school. It's something which I think is so important to all of us in universities in Britain to be engaging with the absolutely essential work you do in high schools, in preparing students, not just for university, but for life in the world beyond. And any way we can help around the areas in which we specialize, it just validates what we do. What would be the point of me teaching the Middle East if there weren't broader interest in this subject? And so do by all means reach out, do by all means grab the books that engage your students. I'm very flattered to John for all he said about my books, but the same could be said about his. And you'll find that there are a lot of really great authors out there whose work will engage your students well. So let me leave it there. I don't know whether we'll have time for any questions, but just thank you very much, all of you, for inviting me to come on board. And thanks so much to the Balfour Project for the very important work they do informing British society from Westminster right down to your school neighborhood on an issue that we all care about so deeply. Deanna, over to you.
Thanks, Eugene. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but I just want to thank you. I can attest that both Eugene and John have very good books on the subject, so do check them out. And I posted a link in the chat box. You might have to scroll up a bit because the debate is fired up. But we had Eugene speak for one of our webinars, and I posted a link to that. He is a fantastic speaker, as you just got a little taster of. And thank you for the super kind offer of helping out our teachers here. And yeah, thank you so much. And sorry for the travel dramas that you're having, but we really appreciate you managing to find some corner of Schiphol to, one of the busiest airports in Europe. So thank you very much for finding a quiet spot. I'm going to invite Imran back and say goodbye to Eugene. Thank you so much again for joining us. And we are going to have a little chat about our exciting new initiative, aren't we, Imran?
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. And it's great to see everyone here and in such strong numbers. And thank you for everyone who's spoken already. It was really insightful, so that was great. So yeah, my face is going to appear a few times, I'm afraid, in this conference. So yeah, I apologize for that. But yeah, this specific slot, we wanted to talk to you about the Facebook page that we are setting up. And it kind of follows on from a question that was put to Joe, I think by Mohammed, who was asking about resources. So when we were talking about this webinar, we were really thinking about, we don't want it to just be a webinar where we talk about the importance of it and how we deliver it and so forth and so on. And it's important, although obviously that's important because it helps provide you with a rationale for taking it on as teachers, but it obviously needs to go beyond that, so that we need to support you beyond today. And Mohammed asked about resources. I think some other people have asked, I think a lot of people actually have talked about resources today. So in anticipation of that, we set up we're in the process of setting up a Facebook page that will be dedicated to helping teachers resource the implementation of courses from GCSE to IGCSE all the way up to A-level. So we know that Facebook functions well with other topics and other units. I'm sure there are people on this call who are members of some of those groups and reap the benefits, which is one of the reasons why we're looking at Facebook as a feasible platform or good platform for this. So we're going to look probably over the summer to organize the Facebook page. We're going to kind of subdivide it into different courses. So we'll have GCSE, IGCSE, and A-level. And then within those subdivisions, we'll split it down again into themes or dates and whatever is most applicable for the units that you're particularly looking at implementing. And that will really provide a facility to pool all of our resources. So I know there are a number of teachers on the call at the moment that will have resources that they are, I'm sure, sharing in the chat right now. And we're going to look to not just pull them together, but also organize them so that, in essence, if we're hoping that people will take on this unit beyond today and actually implement it as a course, the nuts and bolts of that for teachers are to be able to structure it, have a rationale, and to be able to resource it. And so we're trying to create a Facebook area, a hub for that, really. And there's almost like a one-stop shop for all those needs of those teachers. So that's kind of the thinking behind how we're going to construct that, that area for teachers to come and pool resources and obviously seek support as well. We already have an existing support network amongst some of the teachers on this call. We already, as you know, teachers are brilliant at networking with each other for help. So we already have that, I'm sure, in amongst some of us on the call. And so we're looking to expand that as well so that we can support each other with resources, how we can tackle difficult issues, for example. And it's going to be an evolving entity. So we really wanted to flag that up at this stage to encourage as many people to go on to that area as possible and be part of it as it grows and develops. Yeah, so unless you've got anything to add, Dee?
I do, thank you. Just wanted to say that the group is part of the Balfour Project Facebook page, so you can either go on there and look at the groups, or I posted a link. Again, you have to probably scroll up a little bit to find it, or just search for Teaching the History of Israel-Palestine in Secondary Schools, and hopefully the group will come up. Please go and join it and start some conversations in there. Again, I'll be bad cop to Imran's good cop. Please keep it respectful. Again, debate is fine, but just be nice to each other. But do feel free to use it as a space to share any resources you found super useful, ask questions or concerns that you have, give your own personal experiences of teaching the subject, reactions from the parents, school, etc., etc. We really want it to be a very, very active, useful space for teachers thinking about teaching the subject or actually teaching the subject. We've asked people to put their school email address in because we would like it to be full of teachers, genuine teachers. But if you do not want to join for any other legitimate reason and you don't have a school email address, we won't be contacting you on that email address anyways. It's just to verify that you are in fact a teacher. But if you do want to join and you're not a teacher, then drop us an email at info@balfourproject.org. Yeah, I'm also going to share, we have already collated, we've got an education section on the Balfour Project website, and we've collated a bunch of education resources. I'm posting the link there. We've tried to organize it in different topics, but we hope to, as Imran said, organize it a little bit more usefully for teachers who are time poor and pressure rich. So, but do have a look there. There's links to documentaries, resources, all kinds of stuff that you might find useful. Right, so we are now going to go on a break and we will come back in 10 minutes. So please do join us at 11:35 and we will be having some former students, and Imran and will be coming back as well to speak to us on teaching at different schools. All right, well, see you in 10 minutes. Good to go, Mike.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. It now gives me great pleasure to, well, you've met Imran Ahmed. Imran Ahmed and a colleague, Steve Brown, both teach the A-level in different Gloucestershire schools. And I'm now going to invite them to say a bit about the teaching of the subject A-level and then take any questions. Over to you, Imran and Steve.
Thank you, Mike. So me and Steve, as Mike has explained, teach the A-level unit. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I think Joe, Sophia and Alex covered some technicalities really well in terms of how exam boards function, for example. So we're going to try and build on that a little bit, but maybe less towards some of the technical sides of it. But obviously, if you need to ask those questions, please do. So my school is an independent school. It has a largely white British demographic, but there is a fairly big international element to it as well. And I guess in a similar way to Joe, when we were looking at units to take on at A-level, there were a couple of reasons, I guess, why we chose this unit. And one of them was to expand their bubble, to think outside Britain and be a bit more global in their thinking, and also to get a non-Eurocentric views, I guess, to think about it from a different point of view, which obviously history teachers, as I'm sure there are many here, look to do it all the time. So it seemed a very good unit for that. The other thing was it was incredibly interesting, you know, when you look at some of the other topics that are on offer, and they do, as Eugene said, they do have their place and they are important. It's not to undermine those other units, but you don't really need to explain to students why, you know, the importance of this unit. And that was a real selling point, I guess, for our department to take this unit on. So I'm going to talk about two different elements, I guess, of why it's good to teach this unit on the Middle East. One is about the importance of it, which has already been touched on, as has the second one as well, which is to do with resources. And then I'll pass you over to Steve to flesh that out a little bit more, I guess. So in terms of the importance of the topic, as has been said before, it's as topical a unit as you could possibly hope for. So it gives a real global dimension, and the topics are live, you know, and students see that all the time, and they come to lessons asking questions about things like Israel and Palestine. But beyond that as well, you know, the unit isn't just about Israel and Palestine, it's about the Middle East more broadly. So they'll come and speak or come and ask questions about what's happening in Afghanistan and in Iraq, for example. So it being a live issue makes it incredibly topical, which sometimes I think as history teachers, we feel we have to justify our subject. I think it's things like open evenings and open days and so forth and so on. Parents always want to know why, you know, why should they do it? Why is it topical? I've never had that question for this unit. I think it's a given why it's important and why it's relevant. You only have to look at issues such as oil for that to be the case. And I think everyone is fully aware of that in their wallet, if not in their politics. And I think the other aspect to this, I think in terms of the importance, touches on what Eugene was saying. These are really important issues, but you cannot understand them unless you understand the history that precedes them. Now, because these issues are so important and indeed sensitive, I think as much as a teacher, and I'm sure I would hope that I am supported in this statement, as a teacher, it's really important for me to cover those issues and to allow an open forum, a safe environment for those students to consider some of these ideas, to think about some of these arguments, to look at some of the sources of evidence, some of the sensitive issues that they will undoubtedly face. They are going to come across these issues, yeah, Israel, Palestine, and beyond in relation to the Middle East. So I think if we were to try and, if it was a reason to bypass this unit, I think it's a little naive at best. don't underestimate the agency of students. They are much more active on things like social media than us. A lot of the apps and things that they talk about, sometimes I've never heard of them and they're outdated before you know it. So they are going to come across some of these sensitive issues. And also don't underestimate, I think as well, that students want to engage in these topical areas. So if they're going to do it anyway, I would personally much prefer them to do it in a space where we can discuss openly in a safe environment the evidence that backs up some of the claims and the opinions that are undoubtedly going to come out of some of these conversations and some of these lessons. And that fits very well at A-level, I think, because at that age, when students enroll in A-level courses, they're beginning to think a lot more for themselves. They obviously do it at GCSE, but at A-level, they're really thinking about their own position in the world, our position as a country in the world, and our roles and responsibilities. And they're beginning to formulate their own opinions much more independently from us and their parents and so forth and so on. That's nothing new, I don't think, about, people, not just students. Around that sort of age, you're becoming your own person and you want your own opinions and so forth and so on. And I would much rather that they are informed well to make those opinions, so they see the different arguments that are going to be put to them, they see the different evidence that is going to be presented to them, and that we consider that. And at A-level, it's been a really helpful and I think supportive unit for students, and you'll hear from one of my students later who perhaps warrants more of your time than I do, I'm sure, because students ultimately will give you accurate feedback about what they learned from it. But it helps them move forward, when they go out into the world and they see all these opinions and they hear all these opinions. We have already hopefully scaffolded some support around them. So when we take that our way, they know some of the sensitivities that are going to be around these issues. They know some of the challenges that they're going to face if they have certain opinions or if they don't have certain opinions. But I'd much rather that we hone those kind of opinions or consider those kind of opinions in a classroom environment than on what can at times be a really volatile environment on some of the social media websites. Especially when you think about some of the topics that we're talking about here. Obviously, the primary focus of this conference today is Israel and Palestine, but it also goes beyond that. There are a lot of polarized views in relation to these topics. So if they're going to face them, I want them to be equipped. And actually, I think Sophia said something earlier about our roles and responsibilities as teachers to prepare students for being out there in the world. And the world has changed an awful lot, certainly since I was at school, and I'm sure many people here as well. So we're trying to prepare them, it's kind of that cliche in teaching, isn't it? We're trying to prepare them for a world that doesn't exist yet. It changes all the time. And whether we like it or not, these topics, these sensitive issues are in that world. They are out there and they are going to come up. And we want students to have opinions. We want students to think about the different sides, the evidence, and to weigh it up and think about their position and why that position is. And like Eugene said, we want it to be respectful. We want it to be balanced. We want them to have thought for themselves. Of course, these are things that, we as teachers have obligations to try and help students to develop. But we want them to have opinions, that's part of being, socially responsible, and also if we, I would be more worried about if we're teaching or we're avoiding units like this because we're scared of their opinions, and my immediate question for things like that, if someone had those issues is, what are you scared of? If we're trying to bypass talking about sensitive topics, we do it all the time in history. If we're trying to bypass certain topics because they're considered too sensitive, I would feel quite concerned about that. So I think the importance of the topic is the main driver for me. So I wanted to make sure that I talked about that today, because it's incredibly important. And like I said, I don't think it's something to shy away from. I think it's something to embrace, and all the fundamentals of teaching history come into this unit. They really do. And I know Steve's going to talk about some of them a bit later on. Like I said, it also encourages students to reflect on their own position. And it is, I think, the only unit that I've taught at schools where I get parents and students saying that they talked about it at the dinner table, you know, and how it descended into a debate, or you know, the students were educating effectively their own parents. And that, as a person of that age, you know, sort of 17, 18, that must be incredibly empowering and enriching as well, and enriching experience. So I think A-level for me is, and it's not to undermine doing it at GCSE. I completely see the benefits of that, but A-level for me is the perfect time to deliver this this course with all its sensitivities and all its baggage. And actually, that's part of the package, really, I guess. And although there are challenges sometimes, and you do have to face challenges, I think those challenges are quite exciting, and actually something that helps our students to be more well-rounded as well. And these issues are genuine issues. You know, some of the topics that you teach, it is sometimes quite hard to persuade students that they're genuine issues. You know, when you're talking about maybe medieval England, for example, some students just, you know, they can't get on board with that. But this is a topic that absolutely, you know, every student I've ever taught has enjoyed it. They've always said that it's their most favoured subject, even if it didn't start out at the beginning. They didn't think that was going to be the case. So I guess that's the importance of the topic for me. And like I said, that was the main reason to embrace something like this. The second aspect I'm going to talk about before I pass on to Steve is to do with resources, because I thought this might come up, and rightly so, and it's really important. And obviously some of these things have already been covered, of course. Although, Joe, I was a little disappointed that you don't incorporate food into your course, to be honest. At Christmas, we make mamouls, which are absolutely amazing. And my student will hopefully confirm later that, yeah, we sit around and have a chat over the newspapers and make mamouls before we cook them at Christmas time. So that's a nice little activity. I'll send you the recipe. But the topic is bursting full of resources. There are a wealth of resources. Now, some of them might not be formal resources, but again, I think sometimes when people, you know, look at courses and so forth and so on, they probably underestimate teachers' agency. You know, I think ex-colleague of mine once said to me that teachers are like magpies. You know, they see shiny things and they want to take it. And absolutely, I think that's probably the best analogy I've ever heard of teachers, really. So there are resources everywhere for this. You know, it's a live topic, as I've said. So therefore, there are resources everywhere. You know, no longer am I scratching around trying to find interpretations. It's more difficult to not find interpretations. So yeah, I would say there are huge amounts of resources. Obviously, I've talked about Facebook, so please do go and visit that. At the moment, it's more of a discussion area, but when the summer holidays kick in, and I, along with many of you, I'm sure, get a well-deserved break, we'll look at that and try to construct a more well-resourced, I guess, area for the teaching specifically on the Balfour project. But there are so many things out there. So some of them have obviously been listed, but there's everything from podcasts. So Jeremy Bowman did some podcasts, a series of podcasts called Our Man in the Middle East, which, you know, when people, I think someone was asking about balance. I mean, that was a really lovely balance set of, it was a series of podcasts. And it does definitely touch on sensitive issues, but he often presents both sides of it. I know parallel histories and sides not solutions has been talked about. And I know a lot of teachers who have felt like they're really supportive and have been successful in their delivery of the units. There are things like Visualizing Palestine as well, which provide a lot of visual and almost quick fire sort of resources as well, although it's not specifically for teachers. And then there are obviously things like speakers. As I've taken students to listen to some very prominent academics, such as Avi Shleim, for example. I've also got in the Palestine ambassador previously, and these are all extension activities as well. So it really does allow you to differentiate, and especially the higher end are able to really be stretched and challenged, you know, because it's such a live and well invested, I guess, in terms of time and effort and scholarship, that there are loads of opportunities out there for students to extend their understanding. And those academics engage in genuine academic debate, like I said before, and that makes teaching, I think, a bit more, for want of a better word, a bit more meaty. You know, they can look at these polarized views and really decide whether they think they're fair and not fair, and obviously why they think they're fair assessments or not fair assessments of particular aspects of the course. And that is what history is obviously all about. So it's a unit that really does encompass all those things. I think it would be very difficult to teach this unit without covering all these skills that we all, I'm sure, as history teachers consider as essential. Someone asked earlier about fun, making it fun. I think I would agree with probably what everyone who's spoken about that has said. I don't think a unit has to be fun. I think, you know, you want to engage in interesting. And again, there is not a unit that I've looked at that I could say that I thought would be as engaging and as interesting as this. Obviously, you know, I'm sure some people would disagree with that, but from my perspective, it's been incredibly interesting, incredibly engaging, and students have always got on board with it. So it's not necessarily fun, of course, but have they enjoyed the unit? Yes. Did they engage with the unit? Yes. And therefore, that links back to the importance as well. They know the importance of it. And for students that are kind of moving out into the world on their own, it's important that they understand the relevance of it and their own opinion, their own positions on that. And I'll finish by saying there's a couple more resources just to flag up, and then I'll be quiet, I promise, and I'll pass you on to Steve, who's going to talk a little bit more about some of the things, some of the benefits, I guess, that it offers. So at my school, we also hosted, we had a cultural visit from some children from Bethlehem. And that was a really eye-opening experience for not just the students at my school, but some of the members of staff as well. And I think that really made us think about what we have here, and also the effect, the impact of what's going on in the region on people's lives. And I think sometimes we forget that actually that's what history obviously is. It's about the study of humans, of ourselves. And so to meet people that have been embroiled in these issues is incredibly eye-opening and humbling. And I think, again, there's probably no other unit, or very few units, if any, where you could do something like that would genuinely make people reflect on their own lives, you know. And these are things that aren't just about jumping through hoops for exams. You know, this is what it might be idealistic, but you know, the real value of education. You know, students go in, they're thinking about the importance of what they're studying. And yeah, this unit is made for that, really. And then the last thing is the Balfour Project. Obviously, I better seamlessly plug that, I think. So the Balfour Project is one example of a place where you can get lots of resources, and that's going to complement for teachers the Facebook page that we have previously mentioned as well. So yeah, and I think every teacher here that's spoken today, I'm sure will be willing to share resources, and we will pull resources on Facebook. So there is support for people taking this on. Thank you very much, and I'll pass over to Steve.
Thanks, Imran. I'll just give a little bit of background about myself, I suppose. I'm a head of department of a school, which is, again, mainly British white intake. And the reason why I decided to go for basically the Middle East unit I actually took it up when it was an old AS unit for OCR, and continued through to look at it for the current A level as well, more out of anything else, I think, from my own interest. And I think that's something which is sometimes we as teachers forget about, that our interest, someone mentioned earlier about making lessons engaging, having your own interest in it, the fact that you've done your research into it, I think is a key point of it, because they come along with your enthusiasm for what you're actually teaching. And I think another part of it, I suppose, was I was questioning a lot of things of what were going on in the news, and I didn't have a huge amount of background on it. So basically getting to grips with the unit was something which I thought was important. And I think that's important in the skills we try and teach them, basically as history students anyway at A level, which is to question and to ask about these things of which they're not sure of, in an environment where they can feel safe, which I know Joe and Sophia talked about earlier, is this real importance within the classroom that they feel safe to be able to ask questions about things that they just don't know about, especially on very emotive topics like this. And it's why if we come into the idea of using the skills towards their final A level of debating skills, we again, very much like this, ask them to be very respectful of people, to think about what they're saying and to have the evidence to do that as they actually sort of go through the debate too, which I think is important. But I think it builds them to be critical thinkers, which is a major part of what we want them to be. Especially by the time they're 18 and they're going off to the world, possibly to university or possibly anywhere else in life, to just question what's put in front of them and to look for their evidence of that. And I think that's a real skill which we want them to do at this point in their sort of lives. And I think it nicely builds from what they've done at GCSEs. And I admire the people who do it for GCSE as well, because I think it's something that is needed to be studied at some point. And I think it's a great to sort of have that opportunity for the students to get involved in a topic which they don't, in my school, know too much about. One of the things we did think about before doing it was, how would this affect the popularity of our uptake at A level, which I suppose as teachers is something we're always thinking about, and is this going to put them off and things like that. What we've actually found is when we started doing it, we did some surveys of our students and said, well, what would you recommend to students in the future, and also the idea of looking at, I think, the changes which they wanted to do. They were very much along the lines of, when we came to the changing over to the new A level, please keep the Middle East unit. We found it really interesting. We found it very refreshing. We found it fascinating as to what we do, and we think other people should learn about it. It then led to a number of students going on to do history at university. We had a number of students go on to do Middle Eastern studies at university, and it really did have a massive impact on them and what they were studying. And that's across the whole of the Middle East topic we study for the A level. So I think it's really important for them to learn that. I'd also say that when we have prospective parents coming in to look at the school for A levels, it's one of the topics that does catch their eye, and the students are really interested to learn about something they haven't done before. We've had, I think, again, Joe and Sophia talking about the idea of popular topics we've done for years. And I think this really stands out as something interesting to them. And I think I'll always come back to that fact of my interest and their interest pushes this topic forward. And I think it's something that needs to be thought about by teachers a bit more. And the idea of your interest so comes across in the classroom. And I think that's one of the most important bits to it. I don't want to go on too long, because I'm aware that a lot of people have spoken about what I've said as well on that. But I think if I'm going to leave one point for this, I suppose more than anything else, is it's thinking about your students and what you want them to achieve by the end of being 18 years of age. And I think this unit really helps build them for that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve. And thank you very much, Imran. And now, Dee, will you pose the questions?
Yes, thank you so much, both of you. First of all, Imran, everyone wants your recipe. So if you have it accessible, please post it in the chat box at some point. Otherwise, we will share it on the email that we're going to send around to all the people that register for today.
To be fair, they haven't tasted it yet.
Sorry?
I said, to be fair, they haven't tasted it yet.
Well, if the children haven't attacked you for it, then
Yeah.
we're going to presume it's a good one. Like I said, if you are not already on the Balfour Project mailing list, please do sign up, because we do, speaking of food, have a webinar coming up in the next couple of weeks on the topic of food. And I also want to take this opportunity, sorry, I am plugging the Balfour Project also, but as I mentioned earlier, we have a fellowship program, so please do talk to your students, even if they're still at school age, about this as an option. We're in our 3rd or 4th year now, so you know, by the time we normally take sort of 2nd, 3rd year undergraduates and postgraduate students, but it's kind of open. So please do. I'll post a link in the chat box so you can have a little look, but they do amazing things, and quite often they have studied this subject at school level, and this is why they got the interest to go on and study it in some form at university. So we have a question that just came in, just bear with me a second. Lots of people posting resources and so forth. That's amazing. Keep on doing that. And then of course, do join our Facebook group. The link was in the chat box as well. There was a question basically about music, using music in education. And I guess the question is, do you use it? Have you managed to? By the way, the music in the interludes were the trio Gibran, which are amazing classical band that are fantastic in my opinion. So yeah, over to you. How do you use music and other such things in your teaching?
For me, I have used bits and pieces of it. It's something I want to do more of, I think, in the idea of looking into the Middle East part of it, because it's the idea of, I think, when we're looking at all the different groups within the Middle East, it's trying to get an understanding of them for my students in particular. And I think seeing the whole cultural part of it is a great part to do. And like I know Joey and Sophia again mentioned in the GCSE, there are massive time constraints of what you can and can't do. It's something I really want to build on. So again, to be, I suppose, cheeky, it's one of the reasons why I'm here to look at resources, and why we've talked about as well, is the idea of sharing more bits and pieces like that, so I can just make it even better than what I am at what I'm doing.
Yeah, and I would say, well, when we got that cultural group from Bethlehem come and visit, they performed traditional Palestinian music and dance. So that was incredibly enlightening, I guess, for all of us. And I guess it fleshes it out, because it you know, it helps them to understand about culture a little bit more as well. So that was really, I guess, my experience of using music. I haven't used it too much other than that. But again, similar to Steve, I guess I'd be really interested in how I could use it more in my teaching.
Well, I'm actually going to do a little plug for a separate charity. It's called Pal Music. I know they have a concert next Friday in Twickenham with the trio Gibran, but they fundraise for the Edward Said Music Conservatory, which started off in Ramallah, but it's got lots of different branches in the Palestinian territories, in Gaza, Hebron, so forth. I'm going to find a link and post that if anyone's in the Twickenham area. It's going to be fantastic, and again, it's a great cause to support. Israeli music is also useful for the learning tool. I just know of this concert next Friday. So thank you, Caroline Turner, for the comment. I mentioned the fellows are doing these series of webinars. The only one that's scheduled so far is the architecture one. It's a series they're doing called Culture and Conflict. So I've posted a link as well. Please do come along to that. It would be fabulous. Like I said, the students themselves are so inspiring. They're so smart. It's intimidating to me. So, but they're fantastic. So please do come along. We'd love to have a wide attendance. Right, well, thank you very much to both of you. I'm going to ask Mike to come back now and introduce the next two speakers. That was so fascinating. Yeah, actually, can we have them back? Because Gillian's just asked a really interesting question. Has anyone received parental pushback? And I think that would be really, really interesting. really interesting topic. So Imran, Steve, if you wouldn't mind just touching on that before we get the next two speakers on.
Yeah, so I would say that the answer is no. I've never had any parental pushback. I think it's the question I've talked before at another conference about it, about teaching about it, and that was, they were that was the main concern, I guess, in terms of teaching this. And the answer is no. I have had quite a few people coming up to say they thought it was really good, parents. As well. But yeah, I've had nothing but positivity, to be honest, from a parental point of view. And we've never had any kickback from parents.
I'd say that's exactly my experience too. We've actually had parents show interest in what we're actually studying as well, which has been really good. And I think they appreciate the fact of what we've taken on with the topic, and the fact, more than anything else, I hate to keep banging on about it, it's just the fact that their students are basically interested in it. Their sons and daughters just are really interested in what's actually being done, and the fact that they want to do the A level and get to the end of it, I think is just really good.
I find that surprising. Obviously, I'm not a teacher, but I think that's possibly, I can imagine, one of the fears in picking this topic. So it's probably reassuring to a bunch of people out there that you don't have the pushback that you perhaps are scared of. So thank you very much. Sorry for making you come back for that, but I thought it was a very useful question. So Mike, do you want to come back and we will get the next two speakers on?
Yes, and I'd very much like to introduce Fahim Mia, who is studying history at Oxford and who did the GCSE course when he was at school. He was in fact at the school at which Sophia teaches, or used to teach. And then Hattie McCormack, who was taught by Imran in Gloucestershire. She's studying Arabic and Islamic studies at Oxford, and she's going to tell us a bit about her experience with the A level. So can I hand over to Fahim to speak to us?
Thank you very much, Mike. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to speak during this session. Hello, my name is Fahim, as Mike has said. I'm studying history at Oxford. Just finished my end of year exam, so going into second year. So looking forward to that. Just wanted to quickly say hello, Ms. Lopez-Khan. It's really nice to see you after a very long time. And it's been quite interesting to see sort of the teacher's perspective on teaching this course. I was taught this course during GCSE, and it's really interesting to see the sort of difficulties, the logistics, the teaching, the sensitivities from the teacher's perspective. So hopefully Hattie and I can provide the point of view from the students. So I think to start off with, studying the Middle East conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in particular, it sort of opened or broadened my horizon. It sort of taught us, me especially, to have a more nuanced view of everything, really. A nuanced view, whether that's engaging with sources or answering essay questions or exam questions, or sort of seeing international relations in a nuanced view. And it's really interesting because, as Ms. Lopez-Khan said, not that many schools have sort of taken up this course to teach. So when I went to A levels and speaking to my friends and classmates, they were very shocked to hear that I was doing, the Middle East or Mao's China, whereas they were, doing the Cold War or Nazi Germany. So from that point of view, it did sort of, it was unique in that sense, but having that nuanced sort of view on everything does help, because especially with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a lot of the media, news articles and whatnot, they don't delve in deep on the origins of the conflict, and there's a danger and risk of seeing it in a binary view. A lot of people think that it's a conflict between Islam and Judaism. And yes, religion does play a role, but I would say it's a factor among multiple factors within this within this this discussion, debate, and conflict. It includes about, you know, it includes about national identity, land, international politics, and it's far more deeper than just talking about religion. And I think that's something that's very key and most definitely opened my eyes towards. And also, I guess it has been mentioned before by previous panelists, but it because of the current sort of nature of this topic and discussion, and how the ongoing dispute is still happening, there's a strong level of engagement with students. A lot of students, when thinking of history, they have this preconception of being disassociated with the time periods that they're studying. You know, for example, you know, studying about medieval history, they don't see any immediate connection to it with themselves. But in the case with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, it's still ongoing. We can see what's happening. The events are still folding out as we speak. And so it's very interesting in that point of view, how, you know, we have a greater understanding of the conflict, its origins, its causes, and its long-term implications into the present day. And I think this is what Imran mentioned earlier, of having a very safe space to have this discussion and debate with other classmates and peers. I would much prefer to have this discussion of you know, talking about opinions in a classroom setting, than especially at the time of GCSE, when you're only about, what, 16 years old, instead of having such discussion on social media, which, as we know, can become very, very quite intense. And this sort of area of safe area, safe environment to have a discussion goes on to teach sort of the soft transferable skills of sort of having debates, of engaging with other opinions and respecting other opinions, and sort of taking on board other considerations. So being able to sort of facilitate those sort of discussions, I think, is very, very helpful as well. And I think, yeah, I think having that nuanced view that I mentioned before is perhaps the key takeaway from me. And this sort of allowed me to not see anything in a binary 1-2 sort of view, and it opened my horizon to sort of engage with historical sources of any sort of time period in general. And that sort of drove me on to pursue history at A level and, of course, at university level as well. So I think I'll hand over to Hattie now.
Hi, thanks so much, Fahim. That was amazing. Tough act to follow. Yeah, so I study Arabic and Islamic studies at Oxford as well. I also finished my exams yesterday, thank God. So I studied with Imran at A level, and I mean, it has clearly been massively influential in my life and my decisions. I would not be here if I didn't study that at A level. And I think going on for a few points, I think because you have to be so nuanced with your understanding of it, without the binaries, without any of the sort of preconceived ideas of the Middle East, which everybody enters the course with some of them. And I found it really amazing to see some friends of mine who came in with these preconceived ideas. I mean, I'm from quite a rural part of Gloucestershire. Lots of people have, sometimes they have loads of preconceived ideas. They have sometimes some questionable thoughts about what the Middle East is like and the Middle Eastern people are like, and seeing those ideas change and seeing their values change and seeing them become much more open-minded, much more analytical of the media that they are seeing on a day-to-day basis, and sort of going from some questionable reviews to then like actually analysing the BBC where they watch at night, or going home and having conversations with their parents and changing their parents' ideas. And that's when you really see the value that this course has on sort of a much wider scale. I also just think studying something that's hard to study, because it is difficult to look at, it's so new, it's so disputed in so many different ways, it makes you a better student and it makes you a better historian on all the other parts of your A-level or GCSE that you're studying. You have to be so critical of the sources, you have to be so analytical, and then that stretches across whether you're doing sort of early modern history, whether you're doing 18th century history. I mean, that makes you altogether a better student. And I definitely found that when I was studying. And yeah, I think it's really important if you're going into like being a modern citizen at the moment and looking at the Middle East, everything is connected. And obviously it's not just studying the Arab-Israeli conflict, or looking at how that connects to the Middle East as a wider picture, how the Middle East then connects to our society in Europe and the wider world in general. And it makes you a more analytical person, and a person who can look at what's going on and understand it, instead of seeing, which is often I think portrayed in the media, sort of this constant view and these constant images of the Middle East, which are quite damaging if you don't know how to study it, you don't know the history of where they're coming from, if you don't know anything to do with that. So I would definitely say it's really, really important. Yeah, I don't know, maybe we can sort together or something like that. And yeah, I think it's been massively influential in my life, and a really, really important part of lots of other people who I studied with.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Hattie, and thank you, Fahim. Deanna, have any questions come in?
We've got Gillian saying, thank you so much for speaking about your experiences. Do you find yourself taking what you've learned and speaking about it in a wider context?
I most certainly do. And
on social media, she follows up with.
On social media, yes. On social media, it's again, it's a lot more binary on social media, I find. And it's obviously social media is as such that you tend to enter into these sort of like holes of all the information, these echo chambers, and that's been really interesting. So you have to sort of look at both. But definitely, as soon as anything comes up in the media, whether it's like a shooting in a mosque, or last year with the bombings in Gaza, you do end up entering into these conversations with not everyday people, without outside of the classroom, and being able to educate people and be able to talk about it and talk about the history behind them is really, really important.
I think just to add on that, I would agree with Hattie. It does come up on social media, and so it's inevitable to sort of encounter it. And so because what's really interesting is that those who haven't studied the course or don't understand the sort of deep origins of it, they sort of fall into this binary view of whether it's religion or states or whatever it may be, but they risk in falling into that binary view. So especially when having sort of discussions either on social media or face-to-face, it's really interesting to sort of to discuss with them the in-depth sort of causes of it, and sort of thinking about the wider context. I guess it's as a historian, it's very difficult because the papers that I'm studying, the time periods, the locations, geography, it's very different. So there's no obvious sort of cross-fertilization between the two, but I would most definitely say that the skills that we've learned and developed over the course of the teaching of the course has most definitely been consistent and throughout. So that's still there.
Thank you. I don't know if you've noticed, but Sophia says that she's very proud of you, Fahim, and Imran says that it is nice to see you, Hattie. What did he say? Amazing to hear from you, Hattie. So I thought you'd like to see that, basically. We've got a question from Mohammed Amla. Thank you, Hattie and Fahim. You both mentioned binary positions. How can these binary views impacting students at a university level? sorry, how are these binary views impacting students at a university level, and what skills have you utilized in challenging these binary views? Any challenges or successes from your own perspectives?
I think I can give you a very recent example. So we write weekly essays at Oxford for our tutorials, and in one of the weeks this term I was studying Spanish colonialism in South America, and the question was about how successful was the process of Christianization, and this was, I think, at the beginning of term, and I fell into the trap of having a binary view of saying, no, Christianization was completely, it wasn't successful because of the continuation of native practices. And then that sort of, looking back at it now and having that tutorial discussion that we had, it sort of hit me that, hang on a minute, it's not sort of clear black and white as I said it was in my essay. In fact, there were sort of a cross-fertilization between Christian beliefs and ancient native beliefs in Mexico and Peru. And sort of, the adoption of Christianity did not necessarily mean the rejection of ancient religions, or that, the continuation of ancient practices did not mean the rejection of Christianity as well. So it's having that nuanced view, which is very important. And it's something that was sort of really, it was really emphasized during my A-level studies, and is continued to be sort of encouraged at university, where you're sort of challenging the assumptions made in the questions, and I guess in a general view, challenging the sort of the headlines that we see on social media and news articles and so on. So I think having sort of moving away from that binary view and adopting a more nuanced one is very important. So I think hopefully my recent example does provide some help in understanding that.
I would completely agree, and I think because you can't look at the Arab-Israeli conflict and also the Middle East in general as binary and then also completely understand it, it just doesn't work, because it is so, culture is so deep, there's so many different factors going on. And yeah, so when you're looking at the Arab-Israeli conflict, again, that is that thing of going, oh, it's Islam versus Judaism, it's whatever that may be, and then looking at that, going back to the beginning of that sort of study and looking at, what is the history of this, what is sort of the what religions are there, what are the minorities, and all those different things, then actually you can't study it in a binary way at all. And it makes you look at everything that you're reading and everything that you're consuming in media or in history, and going, okay, so instead of looking at it from this way and this way, let's look at it from what's these two views. Is it successful? Is it not successful? Is it important? Is it not important? You can then look at the sort of more subtle ways in which it was both. That makes sense.
Thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, life is very rarely black and white, and it'd be easier if it was. And I think one thing that I've pulled out from today is definitely having a compassion for all views, so in order to help with a wider understanding, right? So we got a question from Jonathan Turner, which is quite interesting from a student perspective. When you studied the subject at school, what were the main sources of information that you relied on, like textbooks or resources from the teachers, Wikipedia, other internet sources, et cetera, and which ones did you find the most reliable or useful to you as a student?
I'll be honest with you, at the time when studying this course at GCSE level for me, I wasn't really sort of, I guess, politically aware. My elder siblings weren't really engaged in sort of politics, whether that's national and international. My parents didn't go to university as well. So, they had no sort of prior knowledge on sort of the wider international affairs, let alone the conflict in the Middle East. So it was I would say, uncharted territory for me. So it was completely new. So at that point, I mostly relied on the student textbooks and teaching from my teachers. And it's been mentioned before with the challenges to teaching this course. And it was sort of challenging from a student's perspective to learn the course as well, because there are so many sort of skirmishes and wars and sort of, you know, they're quite repetitive in name, and there's various sort of actors at play on an international scale, which is very different from I don't know, studying Henry VIII and his ministers, where you have to focus on Thomas Wolsey and Cromwell. But here, in this case, there's far more wide-ranging actors to consider, and their own perspective, their own sort of motives, and so on. So it was very, very much the beginning of my, I guess, historical journey of becoming a historian, and it most definitely opened my and broadened my views. So I would say it was mostly textbooks and teaching.
I would say it's no, we definitely had a textbook that we worked from, and Imran had some really great extra resources. We had to look at sources, I think, a bit more for history than for GCSE. And so we did use sources from I think Rogan and some Avi Shneim and things like this, which were really great. And then wider reading, you have to kind of do wider reading if you want to get get better, I suppose, get to the top grades. And so, I mean, now I would go less away from Rogan, which is quite dry. I would say Albert Horaini has a really good modern Middle East history book. But yeah, so I think a lot of it is from textbooks, a lot of it, but that gives you the core, and then you can go from that and sort of do wider reading and have more ideas and more, some more sources, more ideas, looking at everything from a wider perspective, which you do more at A level than you do at GCSE. And we obviously also made memoirs, which was vital to my education and amazing.
It's crucial. There's a follow-on question. Would you give the same answer now that you've studied at university in terms of the sources?
I would say a textbook is a really good thing to learn the basic dates from and learn the basic history. I would say at university, it's a lot more, you do your own reading, you don't have a textbook, you have to go and then look at sources and read a whole bunch of them and then come up with an idea by yourself. And I actually haven't studied this period yet history at university, but I would say after my A levels, I did go and do wider reading, and looking at different historians and looking at different interpretations of the conflict, and sort of from especially a more modern perspective was really useful, sort of more contemporary. But yeah, I would say it would, once you learn the basics, then you can kind of expand. But yeah.
I think if I may add to that, it's quite difficult because as a GCSE student, your sort of historical skills are somewhat developing and emerging. So I think as a GCSE student, using the textbooks do help because it offers a nice summary, and as you mentioned, Hattie, the key dates and key names of individuals, of events, to a very complex issue. So I guess it's a nice way to introduce the student to the course. But after studying history at A level and history at university as well, I can now say that my skills have developed. So I'm far more comfortable with looking at primary sources and, as you mentioned, Hattie, to look at sort of various books, articles, journals, and sort of collating all of that together. So I guess it very much depends on the level of skill of the student, and I would say there is a disparity between GCSE and university level.
Oh, bless you. Well, it's not just Sophia that's proud of you. I'm proud of you both as well. Having grown up with this issue, it is a long and confusing history that you have to understand to even begin to understand what's happening today. So to come at it fresh and not get overwhelmed by it, well done. You must have had some very good teachers. I've got a question myself, facilitator privilege. I'm going to ask my own question. Were there any films or documentaries on the subject that you watched while you were at school, either at school or in your own time, that you got invested in, that interests you, polarized you? I don't know, because that's always a very good medium, I think, to get people interested in the subject in the first.
There's a really good film on Netflix called The Angel, I believe, about the 1967 war, Six-Day War, and then also the and so it's really, really good. It's actually like a good film as well as being really interesting and historical. And there's also, I think, I did watch some films when I was at A level. I can't remember the names now, I'm sorry. That were part of the like Palestinian films, and they were really good, and from like a local perspective. Yeah, anything else? Sorry.
I'm trying to remember. I don't think I can remember seeing any films or documentaries of such. And I guess that's just a personal thing. I tend to like reading and get stuck into the books rather than watching films and movies. But I guess I can see the attraction to it, and why a lot of young people like ourselves will get engaged with it. But of course, with that, you have to take a bit of caution, because movies are adaptations, and so you have to take into account the sort of slight misrepresentation of historical accounts and events. But yeah, I think especially now with the topic being discussed more, with more sort of documentaries, movies, podcasts being released alongside published work, it does help a lot.
Thank you so much for that. I want to throw in my contribution because a series that came out a while ago with Claire Foy, I really liked it. The Promise, it was a BBC HBO collab, I think, but it was fictional, but it was really good at covering, but through the use of flashbacks, the history of the Mandate period and how it resulted into the situation that we're in now. Jewish director, Peter Kaminsky. So I really recommend that. Yep, John McHugh agrees with me. The Promise was very good and very historical. Yeah, it was it was on the whole fairly accurate, historically speaking. So Imran says, you watched The Promise, Hattie. Did he make you?
I remember now, I'm sorry.
It was really very good. Joe says, likewise, Fahim and Hattie, thank you so much for your contributions. And after your exams too, I mean, well done. And congratulations on finishing them. And someone else says, is it Imran? I don't know. Congratulations on finishing your exams and so forth. So thank you so much for your contributions, and good luck with your further studies. And we are going to keep an eye out, because I think we'll hear from you in the future. So thank you so much for sharing your insights and what it was like to be a student of this subject at school level. And thank you on behalf of all of the people that have that are attending as well. Now I'm going to bring back Imran and Mike, if you don't mind coming back. Then I will hand over to you so that you can wrap up the conference, basically, the workshop.
Right. I would just like to endorse the thanks you gave Deanna. In fact, thanks to all our speakers. Much, much appreciated. Terrific. And thank you also for the questions and the contributions to the chat box. And we will let you know of all the various resources, films, books, websites that were referred to in the chat box. We will send you a list of them. Sandra, can I just bring in briefly Sandra Hamrouni, who's a member of the executive committee of the Balfour Project, and who's put together a long list of online resources. Sandra, will you come in?
Hello, hi, good morning or good afternoon it is now. Thank you, it's been a really wonderful event, so I'd like to say that and to thank all participants. It's been fantastic. I'd just like to say a few words about the resources, just to, I think, differentiate them from the future work that will happen on Facebook. I put these materials together over last year, and they can be found on the Balfour Project website through the education drop-down menu. And they're divided into 4 different sections, which are teaching, learning about Palestine. There's a section on documentary films, online platforms and compilations relating to Israel-Palestine. There's a section on teaching controversial subjects and issues in relation to Israel-Palestine, but not exclusively so. And then there are other resources for teaching and learning about controversial subjects and about human rights and citizenship and things like that. The Balfour Project, of course, can't endorse one set of resources or another. We've tried to list them in alphabetical order, but I think there's a few little changes we have to make sure that's the case. It doesn't constitute, as I say, any kind of recommendation. It's supposed to be an eclectic, a very wide resource. I found resources that are used in America, teaching about Palestine, and from the Quakers, of course, the Balfour Project itself has many resources because that's what we're about. We're about history and about British responsibility. I would, and at the moment I'm working on a list of more general literature and films, including documentaries that would be useful when looking at this area between Israel and Palestine. As I say, the Facebook, I'm sure, will be much more geared to secondary teachers, because that's what this workshop has been about in the first instance. Will be about secondary teachers. I'm sure it will focus much more on what's going on in the classroom and how teachers can use different ways to help each other, etc. I would just like to plug this as a more general list, and it's not only for teachers, I suppose it's for any educators and anybody who is themselves interested in learning more about Israel-Palestine and indeed the teaching of it. It would be great if you could, if you do have a look at any of the resources or use any of them, and indeed many of them may come up within your Facebook group anyway. If you could send me feedback on them, if you use them, or whether you use them and they work or they don't, anything that you would like to say, please send them to me at info@balfourproject.co.uk. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Imran, does anything you want to add?
Not too much. I think just hopefully it's this has shown the breadth of support, I guess, for trying to get this topic more widely engaged with and talked about. And moving forward, I hope that the people on this call feel like they have areas of support that they can go to, be it through Facebook or the Balfour Project directly or one of the teachers or whatever. And yeah, just thank you for attending, and hopefully we see you teaching this unit at some point in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before we wrap up, we are very keen at the Balfour Project to encourage direct virtual links between schools in Palestine and the UK. We're open to suggestions, so if you're at all interested or you have any experience, please let us know. Again, it's on info@balfourproject.org. So it only remains for me to say that I personally have found this a very enjoyable, fruitful learning experience. Thank you again to all contributors. And I hope some of you who have not up until now been teaching this subject will think about taking up the challenge of teaching it. But that, I think, brings things to an end. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Bye.